Your son is dying. We urgently need a donor." The doctor's words hit me like a bolt of lightning from a clear sky. I didn't even have time to process what was happening. I just said, "Take my blood, whatever he needs." I thought it was the worst day of my life. I thought my greatest fear was losing my son. But I didn't know that something far worse was waiting ahead. A few hours later, the doctor called me into his office. He sat there with a serious expression, staring at some papers. "Mark, we have a problem." "What is it?" My voice was trembling. "Your blood, it's not a match." "What do you mean?" "Well, according to the test results, you can't be this child's biological father." The ground vanished beneath my feet. My heart was pounding, and one thought echoed in my head. This is a joke. This is impossible. I had raised him for 7 years. I loved him. He was my son. How could he be nothing to me? My name is Mark. I'm 35 years old. And that day, my life began to crumble into the abyss. That day started like any other. I was sipping my coffee. Sarah was frying eggs, and Alex was coloring his favorite dinosaurs. I smiled, watching them, thinking I was the happiest man in the world. I didn't know yet that everything was a lie. I sat in that hospital, listening to the doctor's words, and my entire life flashed before my eyes. We had spent 9 years together, 7 of them raising our son, Alex. Those had been the best years of my life. Or at least, that's what I thought. I met Sarah when I was 26. At the time, I was just starting to climb the career ladder at my construction company. I had always been a hard worker, no wealthy parents, no connections to help me. I earned everything myself. And by then, I was earning a good salary and planning to buy my first apartment. Sarah worked in the same office building, but at a travel agency. The first time I saw her was in the elevator. She was blonde, with bright eyes and a radiant smile. I remember her joking with a colleague, and I thought, she's the one. I didn't know then that this would be the first fateful mistake of my life. We started dating. It was a whirlwind. Sarah was cheerful, full of life. Being with her made me feel like I was finally living. We didn't do anything extraordinary, movies, park walks, occasional trips out of town. I thought I was lucky that such a wonderful woman had chosen me. A year later, we got married. It was a small wedding, just family and friends. But I was happy. Standing at the altar, I thought, this is it. My real life begins now. 6 months later, Sarah was pregnant. I remember that day vividly. I came home from work, exhausted as usual. She was standing in the kitchen, holding a pregnancy test with 2 lines. I cried. Yes, I'm not ashamed to admit it. I dropped to my knees, hugged her belly, and thanked God for this miracle. I was already picturing holding my son in my arms. Those 9 months were the happiest time of my life. I did everything for Sarah. I woke up at 5 in the morning to make her breakfast. I ran to the pharmacy at night when she had stomach pains. I saved every dollar to provide for the baby. I was ready to do anything for this family. I was building our future, not knowing I was building a house of sand. The delivery was difficult. I stood in the hallway, hearing her screams, unable to help. And then, finally, I heard that first cry. I entered the room and saw him, my son, Alex, wrapped in a blanket, so small, so fragile. I held him in my arms and made a vow to myself. I will always be there. I will do everything to make you happy. I didn't know then that I was making that promise to someone else's child. We moved into our first apartment. I worked like a mule, but I was happy. I came home, and little Alex would run to me. Daddy. I would lift him up, spin him around, and feel like the happiest man on earth. I noticed nothing suspicious. I trusted Sarah. I believed we were the perfect family. I was blind. Now, sitting in that hospital, I replayed every moment in my mind, and it made me sick. Was everything I believed in a lie? Had I been living in a fantasy? I looked at Sarah sitting beside me, and for the first time, I felt cold in my chest. I was no longer sure I knew this woman. I turned to the doctor. I want a DNA test. He nodded. Okay. Sarah's eyes filled with panic. Mark, what are you? I want a test, I repeated coldly, and I already knew. I wouldn't rest until I knew the truth. I stood in the hospital, waiting for the DNA test results, but that was only the backdrop to the real nightmare unfolding before me. Alex was still in critical condition. He was getting worse every day. The doctors were doing everything they could, but he needed a blood transfusion, an exact match. I had type O blood. Sarah had type A, but he had type B. Even if the doctor hadn't said those dreadful words, I would have figured it out myself. 3 different blood types. It was a punch to the gut I couldn't ignore. I stood by Alex's bedside, looking at him. His little face was pale, his eyes barely open. His tiny hand had an 4 in it, his fingers so thin, so weak. Dad, he whispered. I'm here, son. I'm right here. I held his hand, and my heart was breaking. I felt tears welling up, but I couldn't cry. I had to be strong, no matter what the blood test said. He was my son. I raised him. I taught him to hold a spoon. I took him to preschool. I played dinosaurs with him. I carried him on my shoulders at the fair. And now he was lying here helpless, and I couldn't save him with my blood. My blood was foreign to him. Sarah sat next to me, quietly wiping her tears. I saw how nervous she was. I saw her avoiding my gaze. I already knew this habit of hers. When she lied, she couldn't look me in the eye. How are you? I tried to sound calm, but my voice shook. Not good. Mark, he's our son. I can't bear this. Her lips trembled. I looked at her and caught myself thinking, are you sure he's ours? I was scared by this thought. I didn't want to think like that. I didn't want to accuse her, but I couldn't stop the wave anymore. The doctor called me. They found a donor. A man in a nearby ward had agreed to donate blood for Alex. The doctor said they would proceed with the transfusion, and most likely, the crisis would pass. I heard this and should have felt relieved. My son was going to live, but there was only one thought in my head. DNA tests. Who am I to him? After the transfusion, Alex fell asleep. I stepped into the hallway for some air. Sarah followed me. We sat in silence. I lit a cigarette. I had quit years ago, but now I didn't care. She sat beside me and whispered. I was so scared I'd lose him. So was I said. I stared ahead, but I could feel her trying to catch my eyes. I didn't look at her. I was afraid I would see the answer I hadn't officially received yet. The answer I already suspected. That evening, I left Sarah and Alex at the hospital and drove home. I couldn't stay there any longer. I needed time to process everything. I walked into our bedroom. I looked at our bed, at the dresser, where the pictures stood, me, Sarah, little Alex, all smiling, all happy. I picked up one of the photos. It was from a beach trip. Alex was still small, wearing a sun hat, sitting on my shoulders. Sarah was holding my hand, and I suddenly found it hard to breathe. I sank onto the bed and just broke down crying. What if it's true? What if he's not mine? What if it's all been a lie? I didn't know how I would go on if it was confirmed, but I knew there was no turning back now. I waited for the call from the lab. I hadn't slept all night. After coming home, I lay in bed, but my body felt paralyzed. My eyes stared at the ceiling, but my mind repeated just 2 words. Not mine. What if the doctor was right? What if everything I had believed for the past 7 years was a lie? I feared that thought, yet I craved confirmation, because the uncertainty was eating me alive. At 9:12 a.m., my phone rang. I didn't even check the screen. I just answered. Hello, Mr. Mark? This is the lab. Your DNA results are ready. And, a brief pause on the line. That second felt like eternity. The result is 0%. You are not the biological father of the child. I couldn't speak. My heart clenched as if in a vice. I couldn't breathe. Those cold, clinical words ripped the ground from beneath me. I had been expecting this, but I wasn't ready for the truth. Are you sure? Is this final? Yes, sir. The test is 100% accurate. If you have any questions, our specialist can. I had already stopped listening. I slowly hung up. 0%. 0. No connection. Not a single drop of my blood in him. Alex, my son. I held his hand when he took his first steps. I taught him to ride a bike. I wiped his tears when he scraped his knee. I sat by his side through fevers late into the night. And now, they were telling me he was nothing to me? I stood up and walked to the bathroom mirror. I looked at my reflection. Tired face, red eyes, stubble on my cheeks. Who are you now, Mark? I whispered to myself. I punched the mirror. Pain shot through my hand, but I didn't care. I felt nothing, only emptiness. I drove to the hospital. Alex was feeling better after the transfusion. He was sitting up, playing on his phone. When he saw me, he smiled. Dad! I smiled back as if nothing had happened, but inside, I was shattered. Sarah was sitting beside him. I looked into her eyes, and I knew everything. She knew. She had always known. When she met my gaze, she turned pale. I sat beside her, leaned in, and whispered, "We'll talk at home." Her lips trembled. Tears welled up. She understood. I turned to Alex, took his hand. His little palm was warm, and I knew, no matter what happened, I wouldn't abandon him. I loved him. But this lie, I wouldn't let it go. That evening, after Alex fell asleep, we went home. I closed the door and turned to Sarah. "Sit down, Mark." I said, "Sit down." She dropped onto a chair, her hands shaking. I pulled out the envelope with the results and tossed it in front of her. 0%. Do you get it? 0. Mark, I can explain. Who is he? Who's the father? She covered her face with her hands. I grabbed her wrist. I asked you, who the hell is he? Jonathan? I staggered back like I had been punched in the gut. I couldn't believe my ears. What did you say? Jonathan, it was him. Blood rushed to my head. Jonathan, my former friend and worst enemy. He had worked at the same company where I was building my career. He had set me up years ago. Because of him, I nearly lost my job. He spread lies, spun rumors, turned people against me. I barely survived that mess. And now, that bastard was the father of my son? I grabbed a chair and hurled it against the wall. Sarah screamed. I slammed my fist on the table. You ruined my life. I loved you. It was a mistake. I never wanted this. I wasn't listening. All I felt was rage. I stormed out of the house, slamming the door, and got into my car. I screamed, punched the steering wheel, tears streaming down my face. Jonathan, he took everything from me. And now, I would take everything from him, and from her too. I made my decision. I started planning my revenge. I sat in my car outside our house. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Only one thought echoed in my mind. Jonathan, it's him. That bastard. I wanted to go to him right that second, to smash his face in with my fists. But I knew that would be too easy, too merciful. I wanted him to suffer. I wanted him to feel what I was feeling right now. I remembered how it all started with that snake. 5 years ago, we worked together at a construction company. I was a project manager. He was a senior manager. We often crossed paths, even had beers together after work. I trusted him. I considered him a friend. Then one day, I was called into the director's office. They showed me documents full of errors, reports with my signature on them. But they were fake. I knew immediately it was a setup. I nearly lost my job. I barely managed to clear my name, but my reputation was damaged. That's when I found out Jonathan was behind it all. He wanted to climb higher, to take my position. I stayed, but I was never the same. I thought I had learned not to trust anyone. I thought I was smarter now. But I was wrong, because I didn't see how this rat had slithered even deeper into my family. Now I knew I would never forgive him. I planned not just to punch him. I wanted to take everything from him, just like he took everything from me. And I started laying out every step. Step 1, evidence. I knew Sarah's confession wouldn't be enough. I needed something that would make him burn with shame. I decided to gather everything I could. A second official DNA test, signed by the doctor. Proof of their affair. Messages, photos, witnesses. Prepare everything to expose them in front of everyone. Step 2, reconnect with Jonathan. I knew he had no idea that I already knew everything. I decided to use that. I sent him a message. Hey, John. It's been a while. Got an interesting work opportunity. Thought of you. Want to grab a beer? He replied within an hour. Oh, Mark. Of course. Glad we can bury the hatchet. I smiled. He had no idea that beer would be his poison. Not literally. His poison was me. Step 3, the exposure. I decided the perfect moment would be Alex's birthday party. There would be friends, family, neighbors. I would lay all the cards on the table. I would make both of them fall so hard they would never get back up. I imagined the scene over and over. I'm standing in front of everyone, holding the DNA results. I read them aloud. I look Jonathan in the eyes as his face turns pale. I see Sarah start crying. I watch them, humiliated, destroyed. This would be my triumph. I took my time. I planned every detail. I knew I had to be as cold as ice. I was no longer the naive Mark who thought the world was fair. I was a man who had been betrayed, a man who wouldn't forgive. That night, I returned home. Sarah was sitting on the couch, her eyes red from crying. Mark, Shut up, I cut her off. I'm staying here for Alex. For now. But we're done. But it's over. I don't want to hear your excuses. I'll handle this my way. She started crying again, but I didn't care anymore. Something inside me had changed. I was different now, and I knew this was only the beginning. Something inside me changed that night. I was no longer Mark, the kind-hearted family man seeking peace. I became a hunter, and my prey had already been chosen. I started in my own home. Sarah slept in our bedroom. I slept on the couch in the living room. I waited for her to fall asleep, and then I began. I dug out her old laptop, buried deep in the closet. Sarah mostly used her phone, but I remembered she used this laptop often before. It was password protected. But I knew the code, our wedding date, the irony. I powered it on, my heart pounding, fingers trembling slightly. I opened her email. At first, it looked clean, no traces. But I knew women like her. They always left something behind. I opened the trash folder, and there they were. Emails from 5 years ago. Jonathan, you were amazing this morning. I can't stop thinking about that night at the hotel. When will you tell him the truth? Are you sure the baby is mine? Just make sure Mark never finds out. I read them, feeling rage boil inside me. But alongside that rage, satisfaction. I had found my first weapon. I took screenshots of every email, saved them onto a flash drive. This was only the beginning. Next was her phone. I waited until Sarah went to shower. Her phone was on the nightstand. I picked it up and quickly opened the gallery. No deleted photos. But I knew one thing people often forgot. The cloud. Google Photos. Even if you delete something from your phone, Copies often remain in cloud storage. I opened the app and froze. Photos taken 5 years ago. A hotel room. Sarah in a bathrobe. Jonathan shirtless. They were hugging, kissing. Some photos showed things I didn't even want to describe. I was shaking. I took screenshots. Uploaded everything to a secure folder. Password protected. Only I had access. My third target was their mutual friend. I remembered Sarah's friend, Jessica. She always knew more than she let on. I decided to be careful. I invited her out for coffee. Told her I needed help planning an anniversary surprise for Sarah. Jessica came, cheerful, unsuspecting. Casually, I slipped it in. You and Sarah have been friends for ages, right? Oh, yes. Since college. Hey, do you remember when she was pregnant? I was working a lot then, missed so much. Oh, yeah, she was so nervous back then. And Jonathan, they were close, right? He was around a lot. Jessica's face turned pale. She didn't know I knew. She tried to dodge it. Well, yeah, they were friends. Jessica, I leaned in. I know everything. She froze, then quietly said, I'm sorry, Mark. I knew. I told her it was wrong, but she was scared you'd leave her if you found out about Jonathan. I took out my phone. I recorded this. What? Don't worry. I'm not dragging you into anything. I just need confirmation. She was silent. Then she nodded. I had another brick for my wall of truth. That night, I reviewed everything I had gathered. Emails, photos, a recorded conversation with a friend. It was more than enough to destroy them both. I felt power growing within me. I was ready for the final blow. But I knew I had to wait, be patient. Alex's birthday was approaching, and that was when I would strike, so hard they would never get up again. I looked at Alex sleeping. He was softly breathing in his bed. I stroked his head. I will always be your father, I whispered. But they will pay for this. The day was approaching. Just 4 days until Alex's birthday. And it wouldn't be just a party. It would be my day. The day I would strike the blow that would leave them shattered. Every morning, I woke up with a single thought. Just a little longer, a few more days, and I'll put an end to this. Sarah was quiet, moving through the apartment like a ghost. She walked on tiptoes, afraid I might explode at any moment. And she was right. I saw the fear in her eyes. She knew something was brewing, but had no idea what. I didn't give her any reason to suspect what I was really planning. On the contrary, I pretended that I was ready to forgive and move on. I told her, I've been thinking, let's throw Alex a proper birthday party together. Her eyes lit up with hope. Really? Yes. He shouldn't suffer because of our problems. I'm so glad, Mark. She hugged me. I almost pushed her away, but I held back. I hated this woman, but I played my role. I played it so I could crush her completely. I made the guest list. Friends, family, neighbors. And, of course, Jonathan. I messaged him personally. Hey, John. Alex's birthday party is coming up. He's turning 7. Thought you might want to stop by. Wow, seriously, he replied. You don't mind me being there? It's in the past. Alex likes you. Come by. I'll be there. Thanks, Mark. Glad we can move forward. He had no idea I wasn't inviting him to a birthday party. I was inviting him to his public execution. The trap. I meticulously prepared everything to make the reveal perfect. I printed out the DNA test results. I made copies of their email exchanges. I printed the hotel photos. I uploaded the recording of my conversation with Jessica to a flash drive and connected it to my laptop. This wasn't going to be just a confrontation. It was going to be a public display. I wanted everyone to see it. There would be nowhere for them to hide. I even thought about the setting. Children's songs, balloons, laughter. And then I would stand up, tap my glass, and say, I have a little surprise for everyone. I would turn on the projector, and their masks would fall. I envisioned it over and over. This wouldn't just be the end of our relationship. It would be their public humiliation. I wouldn't destroy them. The truth would. I arranged for a friend to bring a projector. I told him, just set it up when I give you the signal. What are you planning? You'll see. I didn't tell anyone the details. This was my personal revenge. I didn't want anyone trying to stop me. The night before the party, everything was ready. Alex was thrilled. He ran around the apartment hanging balloons, his face glowing with excitement. I watched him, feeling a painful tightness in my chest. I had nothing against this boy. I loved him, and that was exactly why I had to do this, to show him the truth, to prove that I was his real father, not by blood but by spirit, the one who had always been there, the one who always would be. At night, when everyone was asleep, I sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee. I stared at the wall. Tomorrow was the most important day of my life. I was waiting for it like a soldier waits for battle. This was war, and I wasn't going to lose. The day had come, the day that was supposed to change everything, the day when I would finally rip the masks off those who had destroyed my life. I woke up at 7 in the morning. Sarah was already bustling around the kitchen, baking a cake. Alex was running around the apartment, happy and excited because this was a special day. He had no idea that today his life, like mine, would never be the same again. I watched them. I was filled with conflicting emotions. I knew that I loved this boy, even though he wasn't my biological son. And at the same time, I hated this woman standing by the stove, smiling as if nothing had happened. How could she look me in the eyes all these years? But today, I wasn't going to let emotions take over. I had a plan, cold, precise, calculated to the second, and that plan would be executed. By noon, guests began to arrive. First, my parents, then Sarah's friends, neighbors, relatives, a few of Alex's friends with their parents. The room filled with laughter, children's noise, and the smell of food. It seemed like a normal celebration, but I knew it was the calm before the storm. I stood by the window when I saw the car pull up. He stepped out. Jonathan, God damn it. I barely held back from clenching my fist until it bled. He was the same as always, confident with a cocky smile, as if this was his life, as if he was in charge here. He brought a large gift box for Alex. "Oh, Mark," he said as he entered the apartment and extended his hand. "Hi, John." I shook it, though inside me everything was boiling. I saw his eyes meet Sarah's for a split second. It lasted a moment, but for me, that was enough. I saw that look. I knew they had exchanged that look many years ago, and I knew that look was their guilt, their fear. The party continued. Children were running. Adults were drinking beer, laughing, discussing news. I was smiling too. I looked like a happy father. They took pictures of me. I held Alex in my arms. We blew out the candles together. But in my pocket, I was clutching my phone, already open to the photos and messages. On the table nearby lay the envelope with the DNA results, and a flash drive with a recorded conversation was plugged into the laptop. I was ready. Just a little longer. Just a few more minutes. I glanced at my friend, whom I had asked to bring the projector. He understood my signal. He started setting up the equipment. Jonathan was joking about football. Sarah was laughing with her friends. I saw her relax a little. She thought I had come to terms. She thought I had forgiven, but I hadn't forgiven. I was preparing. "Attention," I said, tapping a glass with a spoon. "I have a little gift for all of you, for our birthday boy." I saw Jonathan smile. I saw Sarah lower her eyes. Alex was looking at me, happy, suspecting nothing. I want to show a short video about our family, about how happy this journey has been, and what I've recently discovered. I plugged the flash drive into the laptop. The projector lit up on the wall, and the first thing that appeared on the screen was not a happy family video. It was a photo, a hotel room, Sarah and Jonathan, half naked, laughing. Silence fell over the room. I heard someone gasp. Sarah's friends covered their mouths. My mother froze. My father glanced at me. "Mark, what is this?" I turned to Sarah. "Want to explain?" Her face turned as white as paper. She couldn't say a word. I opened the next file. Messages. "You were amazing today. Is the baby mine?" The main thing is that Mark doesn't find out. I continued. "And this, so there's no doubt." I pulled out the DNA test envelope. "Alex is not my son." Everyone held their breath. I looked at Jonathan. He turned red as if he was about to explode. You what, you bastard?" I stepped towards him. "You came into my house, screwed my wife, made her pregnant, and you think I'll just let it slide?" "Mark, calm down," someone from the guests tried to say. "No, I won't calm down. You all need to know what they did." Jonathan grabbed his jacket. I'm leaving." "Go. And don't you dare come near my son again." Sarah was crying, fell to her knees. "Mark, I'm sorry. Get the hell out." The guests quietly left, avoiding my gaze. I stood in the center of the room, red-faced, my face burning. Alex was sitting in the corner, looking at me. His lips were trembling. "Dad." I approached and hugged him. "It's okay, son. Everything will be okay." But I knew, after this evening, our lives would never be the same. The next morning, the apartment looked like a battlefield. Pieces of balloons, scraps of wrapping paper from gifts, plates with uneaten cake. These were scattered across the floor. But these were just the external remains. The real ruins were in my heart, and in our family, which no longer existed. Sarah was sitting in the kitchen, her head down. Her eyes were red and swollen. She hadn't slept all night. Neither had I. Alex was asleep in his room, not fully understanding what had happened, though his eyes had been filled with fear the night before. I sat down across from Sarah. A long silence. I looked at her, and two versions of myself fought inside me. One, the man who had loved this woman his entire life. The other, the man she had betrayed, humiliated, and destroyed. "What do you want now, Sarah?" My voice was cold. She flinched. I want us to somehow... No. I didn't let her finish. After everything, there is no bus. I saw a panic flare in her eyes. She realized she had lost everything. "Mark, I made a terrible mistake, but it was a long time ago. I love you." "Love me?" I laughed. "You looked me in the eyes and lied for 5 years. I was afraid of losing you. And now what? You've lost me." She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. I no longer felt pity. I was empty. My love for this woman died the moment I held the DNA results in my hands. I got up from the table. "I'm filing for divorce," I said calmly. "And what about Alex?" She raised her teary eyes to me. "I'll fight for him, but he's my son, and I've raised him all these years. I love him more than you ever did, and I won't let you ruin his life the way you ruined mine." Her lower lip trembled. "Mark, you can't. He's not your blood, but he's mine in life, and I'll prove that in court." The day was hard. I drove to my parents. I told them everything. My mother cried. My father was silent, staring out the window. Then he said, "She's nothing to us anymore." I nodded. I felt the same. I heard from acquaintances that half the town already knew about our revelation. The news spread like wildfire. Sarah cheated on Mark with his friend. The child isn't his. They exposed everything right at the birthday party. I hadn't sought this attention, but I was fine with it. I wanted her to feel shame, so she couldn't walk outside without feeling the judgmental stares. And Jonathan, he disappeared. I heard he was seen at a bar. drunk, broken. They said his wife had kicked him out. His company didn't appreciate the scandal either. He lost clients, and it seemed he was now looking for work somewhere across the state. His life had collapsed too, and I was satisfied. I didn't touch him with a finger, but I destroyed him. In the evening, I returned home. Alex was sitting in his room, drawing. "Dad, can we go to the park tomorrow?" I smiled. "Of course, son." To me, he was my son. No matter who his biological father was, I was his father in life, and I wasn't going to give him up. I stood in the doorway, thinking, this war isn't over yet. There will be a court battle ahead, but I won't lose. I've already won the most important thing. I remained his father in my heart, and no one can take that away from me. I always thought the worst thing in life was finding out you've been betrayed, that your wife carried another man's child under her heart, and you spent 7 years raising someone else's son. I was wrong. The worst thing is the fear of losing that child. The child who has become your own, even if your blood isn't the same. After the scandal, Sarah was silent. She didn't try to talk to me, didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't beg to fix everything. She was afraid. She understood that she no longer had power over me, and she knew I wouldn't stop until I won custody of Alex. I called a lawyer. It was an acquaintance, my colleague's husband. I knew he specialized in family law. "Peter, hi. It's Mark. I have a problem." "No, not a problem. A war." We met that same day. I told him everything. About the betrayal, about the DNA test, about Alex not being my biological son, about the birthday revelation. Peter listened, watched me closely, and nodded. Then he said, "It's a tough case, but not hopeless. What are the risks?" "The court considers the child's best interests. You've raised him for 7 years. You're his father. But if the biological father asserts his rights, Jonathan, yes. If he tries to claim paternity and files a countersuit, things will get complicated." I felt a burning in my chest. I hated that bastard, and the thought that he might try to take Alex away filled me with panic. What should I do? Prepare for now. We'll file a custody claim. You'll need to prove that you're the only one who can provide stability and well-being for the child. I have everything, a job, a home, support from my parents. That's good. But you need one more thing. What's that? The support of Alex himself. Those words stuck in my head. I went home and sat in his room for a long time. He was sleeping, hugging his dinosaur, my little Tyrannosaurus, my son. I stroked his head. "I'll never let you go. Do you hear me, son?" The next few days, I worked systematically. I began gathering everything that could prove my case. Photos of me and Alex on vacation, in the park, on the beach. Videos of his first steps, his birthday, where I'm helping him blow out the candles. Statements from my parents, who saw me raising this boy and knew I was his father. I even went to the teacher from his kindergarten. She told me, "Alex always said, 'My dad is the best.'" Those words hit me straight in the heart. But I knew Sarah wouldn't sit idly by. I noticed she started spending more time with Alex. She took him to the park, bought him toys. I saw that it wasn't just a desire to be a good mother. It was her strategy. One evening, when I came home from work, she was waiting for me. "Mark, we need to talk." "What now?" "I've contacted a lawyer too." "Great. I don't want to fight you, but Alex is my son, and I won't let you take him away." I smiled. "You already let Jonathan take 7 years of my life, and now you're afraid I'll take your son? Your time is up, Sarah." She started crying, but I didn't care anymore. I was ready for this war, and I was going to win. I did the last thing I planned. I met with Jonathan. I found him in a bar. He looked pathetic, unshaven, disheveled, red-eyed. "What do you want?" He muttered. "I just want to know, are you going to claim Alex?" He laughed. "I don't need that. That's your problem." I exhaled with relief. Stay away from me. And from him too. Screw you. I walked away, but I knew that was another winning step. Jonathan wouldn't fight. I was the only one left fighting for my son's heart. That evening, I sat on the couch. Alex had fallen asleep beside me, resting his head on my lap. I stroked his hair and thought, I won't lose. I've already decided everything. I'll do whatever it takes to keep this boy with me, because he's my son, not by blood, by heart, and that's far stronger. I will remember this day forever, the day that would determine my son's fate, when the court had to decide who would be a father to Alex, me or no one, because I never considered Jonathan a person. I stood before the mirror in my bedroom, suit, tie, neatly styled hair. I looked like a confident man, but inside, I was shaking. I stared at my reflection and repeated to myself, you have no right to lose. I stepped into the hallway. Sarah was already waiting, dressed in a modest black dress. She looked tired, exhausted, but her eyes were burning with determination. I knew she would fight to the end too. Alex stayed with my mother. I hugged him before leaving. Everything will be fine, son. I love you. I love you too, Dad, he said, smiling, not fully understanding that today's future was being decided. We arrived at the courthouse. The corridor was gray, cold, just like my emotions. I saw Peter, my lawyer. He nodded to me. How do you feel? Like I'm about to be executed. Be confident. The truth is on your side. I looked at Sarah. Her lawyer was whispering something to her. She glanced at me from the corner of her eye. I responded with a cold stare. The hearing began. We entered the courtroom. The judge, a woman in her 50s, a stern look. She looked at us, reviewed the documents. Mr. Mark is filing for sole custody of the minor, Alex, 7 years old. Mrs. Sarah is filing a counterclaim for sole custody. She raised her head. Am I correct in understanding that the child's biological father is not involved in the case? Yes, Your Honor, we said in unison. The judge nodded. Very well. Let's hear from the parties. I spoke first. I stood up and stepped forward. I didn't read from a paper. I spoke from my heart. Your Honor, I have raised Alex since the day he was born. I was the first to hold him in the maternity ward. I taught him to walk. I sat by his side when he was sick. I took him to school. He calls me Dad. And to me, he is my son. Yes, I am not his biological father, but I am his father in life. And I cannot imagine my life without him. I paused. I looked at the judge. In her eyes, I saw something understanding. I have everything necessary to raise him. I have a stable job, my own home, the support of my parents. I love this boy, and I will do everything to ensure he is happy. I turned my head toward Sarah, and I do not want to deprive him of his mother. I am not her enemy, but I want my son to have a father, and that father is me. Sarah spoke as well. She cried. She said she regretted her mistakes, that she loved Alex, that she was afraid of losing him, that I was a good father, but she was his mother, and a child should stay with his mother. The judge listened attentively. I didn't hate Sarah in that moment. I saw that she truly loved our son, but I knew that I loved him no less. Evidence. My lawyer presented to the court photos, videos of our shared moments, statements from my parents, testimony from the kindergarten teacher, and most importantly, a statement from Jonathan, who officially renounces parental rights. That was the key moment. The judge took special note of it. Final word. The judge looked at us. Her words were simple. I see that both parties love this child, but I must make a decision based on the child's best interests. I held my breath. I grant joint custody. The mother and father have equal rights to raise the child. The child's primary residence will be with the mother. However, the father has the right to regular contact. It was like a splash of cold water. I didn't win everything, but I didn't lose either. I remained in my son's life, and that was the most important thing. Sarah approached me after the hearing. Her eyes were red, but there was no anger in them anymore. Thank you for not taking him away from me. I did it for him, not for you. I know. We stood side by side, two people who had once been a family. I knew I would never be able to love her again, but I knew we would always be connected through Alex, my son, not by blood, by heart. I returned home. Alex ran to hug me. Dad, I'm here, son. I'll always be here. I held him in my arms and knew I had won. I remained his father, and nothing else mattered. The court was behind us. We all returned to our homes, but each of us was already a different person. Me, Sarah, and even little Alex, who, without fully understanding, still felt that something had changed. I had won, but this victory didn't bring me the satisfaction I had hoped for. I remained Alex's father, but now my life was divided into two parts, before and after. The first week after the court decision was the hardest. Sarah and I lived in the same apartment, but we were two strangers. I slept in the living room, she in the bedroom. We spoke only when necessary. Will you pick up Alex from school? Yes. Did he finish his homework? Yes. No extra words. No questions like, how are you? Or how's work? A wall stood between us. A wall she had built herself with her lies. Alex was the only one who seemed to try to keep us together. He still didn't understand why Dad no longer slept with Mom, why we didn't watch cartoons together in the evenings. But he felt the tension. Children always sense that. One evening, as I was reading him a bedtime story, he suddenly asked, Dad, will you and Mom live together again? I froze for a second. We live together now, son. But, like before, I swallowed the lump in my throat. I don't know, son, but whatever happens, I will always be with you. Always. He nodded and fell asleep, holding my hand. 2 weeks later, I moved out. It was a decision I feared, but it was necessary. I found a small apartment near Alex's school. Sarah stayed in our shared home. We agreed that Alex would stay with me 3 days a week and every other weekend. The first night in the new apartment, I sat on the floor in the empty living room. I drank a beer, looked at the walls, and thought, here it is, your new life, Mark. It hurt. I loved that house where we had renovated together, where Alex took his first steps. But I knew, where there is deceit, there is no home. Alex adapted quickly. I set up a room for him, bought a new bed, dinosaur-themed bedding. He loved dinosaurs. I took him to the park. We went grocery shopping together, watched movies. I did everything so he wouldn't feel the emptiness left by the crack in our family. But every time I took him back to Sarah, my heart clenched. I feared she would turn him against me, that he would stop calling me Dad, that I would gradually lose him. One day, when I brought Alex back to his mother, Sarah came out to see me off. For the first time in a long while, we were alone. Thank you for treating him well, she said. He's my son. I know. We stood in silence. I saw regret in her eyes. She was no longer the confident woman who used to laugh when I came home from work. She was broken, and I was broken too. Will you ever be able to forgive me? Her voice trembled. I looked at her. I already have, but I will never forget. That was the truth. I let go of the hatred. I no longer wanted revenge, but I could never love her as I once had. Life slowly found a new rhythm. I worked, spent time with my son, sometimes met up with friends. I began to feel that I was slowly coming back to life, that the past was no longer pressing on me like a weight. One day, Alex, coming home from school, said to me, Dad, can I draw our family? Of course, son, but I'll draw you and me, and Mom. But you'll be separate, and Mom and I will be together. Why like that? Because you're always with me anyway. even if you're not at home." I nearly cried. He understood everything, more than we thought. That evening, "Put him to bed," I said. "I'm proud of you, Alex." "Why, Dad?" "Because you're strong." "And are you proud that I'm your son?" "Always." I turned off the light, but sat in the dark for another 10 minutes. I watched him, and I knew I did everything right. I lost my wife. I lost the illusion of a perfect family. But I kept the most important thing, my son, and nothing in the world would make me lose him. After moving out and finally separating from Sarah, I thought my life would never be the same again. And I was right. But I never imagined it could actually get better. 3 months had passed since the court ruling. Those 3 months changed me more than the entire 7 years of marriage before. For the first time, I felt like I was living my own life, not playing the role of a convenient husband who could be deceived. Morning, I wake up in my small apartment. I hear Alex's quiet breathing. He had once again snuck into my bed, despite having his own perfectly set-up room. His little hand rests on mine, and I realize I need nothing more. My son is here with me. I started changing. At first, it was subtle. I took off my wedding ring, and for the first time in a long while, I felt free. I signed up for a gym. I began looking better, started jogging in the mornings. I returned to my old hobby, fishing. When Alex was with me, I took him to the lake. We fished together, brewed tea over a fire. He loved those days. And so did I. "Dad, this is cooler than the tablet." "I told you, son." Work also took off. I was no longer afraid to stay late or take on a new project. I worked not to escape home, like before. I worked to build a better future for myself and Alex. I got promoted. I became a department head. My colleagues noticed I had changed. More confident, more alive. As for Sarah, we began communicating more calmly, without resentment, without shouting. I saw she had changed too. That exposure broke her, but at the same time, it made her grow. She was also trying to be a better mother. Sometimes we met all together. Her, me, and Alex. We would go to the park or a cafe. People who didn't know our story might have thought we were a happy family. But we would never be that again, and we were fine with it. I started opening up to new experiences. One day, a colleague invited me to dinner. Her name was Emma. Divorced, raising a daughter. We talked all evening, and for the first time in months, I laughed sincerely. I didn't fall in love right away. I was afraid of new relationships. But that meeting showed me that life goes on, that I could be happy, that there are women who don't cheat, don't lie, don't destroy. One evening, as I was putting Alex to bed, he suddenly asked, "Dad, will you ever love another lady?" "Why do you ask?" "Well, so you won't be lonely when I'm at Mom's." I smiled. "Maybe I will. But you will always be the most important to me. I love you too, Dad." I hugged him, and I realized my life wasn't ruined. I had started over with a clean slate, and for the first time in many years, I was happy. Almost a year had passed since that day when I first heard those devastating words. 0%. You are not the biological father. Back then, I thought my life was over, that everything I had built, everything I believed in, had crumbled like sand slipping through my fingers. I thought there was no coming back from that, but I did rise again. And now, as I stood on the lakeshore, holding Alex's hand, I knew I had won. Not a court case, not a war with Sarah or Jonathan. I had won my life. We had come here together, just like we had so many times before. Alex had grown taller, stronger. His face glowed with happiness. "Dad, look at this huge fish," he shouted, reeling it in. "Great job, son." I laughed along with him, and at that moment I knew no one would ever take this boy from me. It didn't matter what DNA said. It didn't matter what happened in the past. I was his father, and that was all that mattered. My relationship with Sarah had become calm. We no longer spoke about the betrayal or the courts. We had become partners in raising our son, and I saw that it was right. For her, for me, for Alex. Jonathan, I never saw him again, and honestly, I didn't care. He disappeared from our lives like a bad dream, and may it always stay that way. I had started seeing Emma. It wasn't like a fairy tale from the movies. We were both cautious, scarred, but we felt good together. And Alex grew close to her daughter. They became friends. I no longer dreamed of the perfect family, like I once did. I realized a true family isn't a stamp and a passport. It's the people you love, the ones you wake up for in the morning, the ones who call you dad, even if you don't share the same blood. One evening, as I tucked Alex into bed, he suddenly asked, "Dad, will you ever leave me?" I sat beside him and hugged him. "Never, son. I'll always be here. Promise?" I promise. And that was a promise I would keep, even if I had to walk through hell to do it, because I was his father, not by blood, by heart. I stepped out onto the balcony and looked at the starry sky. Somewhere beyond those stars was a new day, a day when I would wake up to Alex's little arms wrapped around me, and I would know that life goes on, that you can survive betrayal, that you can become stronger after pain, that a father's love for his child is stronger than anything. I smiled. My new life was just beginning. Please subscribe to our channel Stellar Stories. We have new amazing stories coming out every day. Thank you.